braking.
Oh, it's insane. Jeez. Like yours is the braking's off the charts.
All right, guys, we're here at the beautiful TPC Sawgrass in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. Justin James, Dr. Scott Lynn. All right, so we are here today, and Scott, we just got done going through Justin's numbers. We're gonna go through mine now.
So, I mean, much different in terms of timing for compared to Justin's swing there. Like you can see the length of the backswing is really long. Like that club starts moving away, and it's amazing to me how much force you put in. This amount of negative torque, so like that backswing turn torque is like massive. So you're putting a bunch of kind of negative rotational torque into the system. I don't think I've ever seen that much. So this is you trying to twist the plate backwards, or trying to twist so you're pushing your trail foot towards the target or towards the ball. So you're pushing this foot towards the ball to create that reaction force that shoves your right hip backwards, and then you're trying to pull this foot backwards, which creates the reaction force that brings that hip forward. So you're producing like negative torque. So negative torque means you're trying to spin your pelvis like into a backswing position. Okay. And this is something I've always thought could be highly related to kind of a stretch shorten cycle. So if I really produce that negative torque, then you could stretch your hip, and that's what we were talking about before, right? I'd have to look back at the swings you had at Dana's place. I don't think you had that. So this could be you really getting into that right hip and creating that stretch that you said you didn't feel before we started messing with some of that stuff, getting into that right side better. So that's super cool. Haven't seen that before. I'd have to look back, but that would have popped out to me when we were looking at your swings at Dana's, and I don't remember that being there. So that is definitely different. And then we tried to work on this horizontal force. You actually get more horizontal force really early in the backswing right here, where you're kind of stopping that. So that's your braking horizontal force, because if I move this back again, you're doing your rocking. So there's the positive, negative as you rock from side to side. So that seems to me to be and I think Kyle said the same thing, that he did that or he started doing it for more timing and relaxation purposes, not really to create more horizontal force, but it seems to be a
I was doing it when I won. I didn't even know I was doing it.
Right.
Yeah, but I was waggling with it too. Like I look back on when I won Worlds, I'd have this waggle and just, you know, some movement. And then he started the dramatic work, because he would get like locked up, I feel.
Right.
Like, and he probably should have, you know, he was positioned to win the year before he won and went OB.
Right.
He just, you know, he was the fastest guy in the finals at that point. I think he'd get locked up.
Sure. No.
And that rocking would just, I feel like, take his mind off of it. He's not rocking anymore, because I think he's, you know, gotten over some of that tension.
Right. I mean, and there could be, like, the feet might not move, but there still could be, like, this is where I'd like to see these forces. I imagine there's still something there, like pushing back and forth without the feet literally like stomping. But so that would be, you know, that's your negative, where you're pushing back and then you stop it.
Now and what we're looking at here is kind of how it peaks in horizontal, it kind of dips, and then starts to go up again.
So this is your push-off horizontal force right here. I would imagine that most of this is braking, because you can see the impulse under here. There's quite a bit of negative. So you're braking the negative, then producing positive, which is going to start to translate your pelvis towards the target. But to me, what created, I mean, this is 219 ball speed with those balls was pretty impressive there. And if you get right here, this is what I was talking about before. So you see how he produces that horizontal force, and then as he transitions to turn into the downswing, it shoots directly into the negatives. And that is insane. 60% of your body weight, or 144 pounds of like horizontal shear forces. That's definitely a world record. I've never seen that before. So this is where, and this is, I mean, if we look at your pressure right now, let me see where you are. Yeah, you're 87% off your front side. So you're basically shoving this, I have an arrow here. You're shoving this lead foot towards the target, which is creating a reaction force that's like stopping you from moving towards the target and creating that break. And this is the most I've seen ever in this. 61%. And you see how where that peaks is very close to where his vertical peaks. So this is kind of where he's just jamming that left foot into the ground and creating a big vertical along with a big break. So it's stopping him
And that's what we're talking about with Justin. So his peaks were they slightly different?
He had a peak like this, but it was over here. Like you have one over here as well, but it's much smaller. So this is where I think he went to do it, and maybe the oblique triggered your brain to be like, man, and it kind of went, whoa, 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 and then it slammed on later. I'd be interested to see once that's 100% healthy if it looks more like this. My hypothesis is that it would. Because whenever you see that kind of stuff happening, there's two places you could see like a bunch of bouncing around of the forces. If you jump and land, like, so, you know, when you put your foot back down after you lift it, it was kind of because that's just tissue shaking and stuff shaking as you put your foot down. But if your foot's not like landing on something, that generally your brain kind of freaking out. You put a bunch of force in, your brain's like, hang on 1 second, it kind of freaks out a bit. But that corresponding with that, and that's the first time I saw this, the big negative break corresponding with the big positive vertical force was with Kyle. And I was like, that's kind of makes sense why you would want that to get a lot of speed, because that's that like stopping and accelerating through. So if you stop proximally, and that was the whole theory behind like the kinematic sequence when it first came out, right? I stop my pelvis and my thorax takes off. I stop my thorax and my arm takes off. And I stop my arm, and so I think that's partially that. I mean, that's all in the transverse planar rotational, but it's kind of the same theory.
Yeah. So now, obviously, you know, I don't know if we could say low horizontal from left to right, but obviously it's got a dip a little bit lower than Justin's.
Yeah.
What do you attribute that to in terms of my sequencing of how I tend to get a little bit more of an early shift off the ball, more of a Henrik Stenson move?
Right.
Do you think that plays a role in it in terms of the timing of it?
The early shift off the ball is creating this negative force, because that negative force happens like just before you start to take the club away. So you can see that's your shift. So, and obviously forces come before motion. So you're creating that big negative force, and now we're going to see your body in the next couple frames move away from the target. I'll do it this way. I forgot how fast this thing's collecting. So now you see that, so that force created that motion off the ball. And now, obviously now it's the opposite, right? So now you've created some momentum of your body weight moving to the right. And so what do you have to do? Well, you have to break it. So now it has to turn around and be positive. So I would argue that most of this first blip here is you breaking that backwards motion until it gets here. And now this is your little push-off peak here. And that's something we've been working on, and I mean, that was our hypothesis, right? Because you're like top of the tour average of torque, you're way above tour average of verticals, but this one was a little bit lower, and I'm like, well, maybe we can get more of it, because you're getting to the outside of your foot there. But maybe
where's the pressure on this one?
78 on the right, so you're a lot more of a centered kind of a swinger, like you're not 100%, right? So we would say most of the time like a left leg dominant swinger would be like 50 to 60%, 100% would be right leg, and 80 would be more centered. And one hypothesis I would have here, if we wanted to create more horizontal force, it's hard to push hard off of a straightened joint, right? Mm-hmm. So with the straight right knee, it's hard to really push off that. Right. So I would want to keep some flex in that and see what happens. And it could slow you down. Like, I don't know, maybe horizontal's not for you, and, right. and it might slow you down, but that would be, if our hypothesis is we want to add more horizontal to add more speed, to add more horizontal we would need more flex, because you can't push that leg into the ground this way. Let me get rid of these arrows. So you can't push that leg into the ground this way with a straight knee. It just, right. it's not going to happen. And I would try, I think we messed with this a little bit, was turning that foot in. Like, remember Justin's left foot was turned in a hair when he went to produce vertical? I think, remember you were telling me about the anatomy of your hip, and I think that's something we're going to learn a lot more about. Mm-hmm. So if your hip is kind of oriented like this, being like this is actually you're kind of flaring your foot. So we have to have it straight. And so if your foot's angled in, that could put your hip in a more neutral position, which could help you load it a little better. Yeah. And I mean, I would feel like it'd be hard to turn my foot in and get to the outside half of it. Like, it's really hard to get out there if it's turned in a little bit. Yeah. So, and I remember, I think it was when we first did that drill where I pulled you away from the target, your foot naturally just went in. Like, when I started to pull you, you had to push back, your foot turned in a little bit, and I'm like, ooh, maybe that's something that could be good for you. So that'd be something I'd play with, is that and a little more knee bend, or try to keep that knee a little more flexed, because then you can actually push off of it. And then I think we'd get more of this. You already got like tons of breaks to break it. But this tells me you're really loading your right hip better. You're turning into that hip a lot more. Remember you said you really never felt that internal rotation of the left hip before, or all the muscle of the right hip, sorry. Yeah. So, and that is what that is right there. So like that would jump out at me for sure. and I don't remember that being there
Right.
Last time. So that I think we're moving in the right direction, and we didn't. I mean, it was cold that day, but we didn't get you anywhere near some of the club speeds that we got today. So
yeah. So now move on to torque. Let's talk about that. So testing on the higher side of the torque average. Not that is necessarily great in our world or means much in our world, but
it's an interesting here. I don't know if the mat didn't slip. The only time I've ever seen like a double peak torque before. So you see, I mean, you see it the odd time, but like Matt Wolf has one peak and then it goes down to 0 and then comes back. And it was when he like tore the mat right off the plate.
Got it.
So it didn't seem to do that here, but that could be. And what we noticed in Wolf is he pushes like his front foot towards the target first and then his back foot away from the target like later on. So there's a timing difference between them where most people do those both at the same time and just create one peak. So I don't know what that is. My original hypothesis the last time I saw it, it could, oh no, that's not even, let me see where that foot goes. I don't know. Can you see if your foot's not entirely on the plate, that could be it. Maybe you're pushing and some of the force is going onto the,
Yeah.
It's really close. So it could be that part of your foot's just on the green and not on the plate, and that's where that is, you're not getting that push. So that's possible there. Because that's different. So the only time I've ever seen like a really big double peak was when Matt Wolf tore the mat off. So obviously when the mat's slipping, it's not measuring, the plate's not measuring anything. But still, I mean, if I kind of draw a peak between those two peaks, where if your foot was entirely on the plate, where it would kind of be there, which is in between, right? So the horizontal's already peaked, the vertical would peak about there, or the torque would peak about there, and then the vertical comes up last. And a lot different. I mean, I think if we had some like neurological tests, it seems like Justin's swing is much more compact, right? There's like much less time and that's where his rate of force development is like ridiculous. You get up to a significant amount of vertical force. I mean, it's not anything to scoff at. It's 273, so it's still 650 pounds.
What was Justin?
He was 302. But his was 690, I believe, almost 700. So I think he weighs a little less than you, I would say.
25.
230.
Yeah, so that would make sense. Yeah, so 275 is still a lot of vertical force. But you can see how it gets up there. It just kind of takes a little bit longer to get up there, which is fine. And that's where your swing, one of our ambassadors, Ben Shearer in New Jersey, talks about like a resistor or releaser swing. So a resistor swing would be like Tony Finau, right? Like a whoosh. And that I would say the way your nervous system works is a little more like that. Yours is more like a Phil Mickelson, where it just takes a lot longer to get up to speed. And obviously, I don't think you can be a long driver and be a Tony Finau, right? Like, and we saw that he lengthened his swing a bit, I think, and then got more speed. I think I saw a video of him. So I think to be a long drive person, there's no way you could be a really short backswing to get that amount of speed. But I would say you're more of like a resistor type of swing, and you just need a little bit more time to get up to those speeds, because you can see the length of your swing in terms of the time is a lot longer. The backswing takes longer, and the rate of force development of the downswing takes a little longer too. But I think you're right. I think you make a hypothesis from this, and then you test it out and you see it, because at whatever it is, 155 miles per hour, like your body's in survival mode at that point. So it's hard to, and like Justin said, you could change one thing that could, like, you try to get more braking force and it felt like you got locked up and over the top, and whereas other people could have, that could be a really good thing. So, and there's so many tools to change these numbers, right? Like we have tons of different drills, tons of different ways to try to change it, and I could explain it to you one way and it could destroy you, and then I could explain it to you that way and it could be really good for you, and then I find a different way to explain it to you and it works. And so, because there's so many factors, you can't just make one change in a golf swing, right? Because if you change one thing, that changes this, and how all of your brains and nervous systems have adapted to this already is, you know, you don't want to mess with too much, because there's already lots of speed in there. You wouldn't want to, and at these high speeds, if you start messing with too many of the forces, that could create an injury risk for sure.